A frozen highway, a broken motorcycle, a massive leather-clad outlaw shivering in the relentless snow. When an 8-year-old runaway gave up his only blanket to save a dying Hell's Angel, he expected nothing. He never guessed that single act of mercy would summon an army of outlaws to become his family. The wind howling through the concrete ribs of the overpass sounded like a dying animal. It was mid-November in Northern California, the kind of biting, unseasonal ice storm that caught the entire state off guard. Rain had turned to sleet, and the sleet had frozen into a treacherous sheet of black ice that coated the desolate stretches of Highway 99. Underneath the sprawling shadow of the highway bridge, 8-year-old Liam Harrison was trying to make himself as small as humanly possible. He wore a faded, oversized flannel shirt that offered absolutely no protection against the freezing air, his thin legs trembling inside a pair of torn denim jeans. But clamped tightly in his small, numb hands was his most prized possession, a frayed, faded blue fleece blanket. It was the only thing he had left from the mother he barely remembered, and tonight, it was the only thing standing between him and the lethal cold. Liam was a ghost in the foster care system, currently running from a nightmare. His latest placement was a dilapidated farmhouse run by Gregory Dalton, a cruel, manipulative opportunist who collected state checks while locking the foster kids in an unheated cellar whenever they spoke out of turn. Tonight, after Dalton had hurled a glass bottle at another foster kid, Liam had unlocked a side window, squeezed his small frame through the gap, and run into the blackness of the storm. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew that if he stayed, he would not survive the winter. But out here, the cold was a different kind of monster. As Liam huddled against the damp concrete pillar, dragging the blue fleece over his head, a violent metallic screech ripped through the roar of the storm. Sparks showered across the black ice on the access road, just 50 yards away. A massive custom-built Harley-Davidson motorcycle had lost its grip on the frozen asphalt, sliding furiously before slamming into the guardrail. The heavy machinery groaned, a twisted heap of chrome and steel. Liam peeked out from his blanket, his breath puffing in small white clouds. A figure was trying to drag itself away from the wreckage. It was a giant of a man, clad in heavy denim and a leather cut that bore the infamous winged skull, the death's head patch of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. This was Wyatt Lawson, known to his brothers in the Oakland chapter as Brick. Standing at 6 feet 4 inches and built like a freight train, Wyatt was a man who had seen the inside of penitentiaries and the wrong end of a shotgun. He was hardened, scarred, and completely unyielding. But right now, Wyatt was in serious trouble. His bike had pinned his leg during the slide, tearing the muscle and leaving a deep gash that was rapidly soaking his jeans in blood. The shock of the crash, combined with the plummeting temperature and the blood loss, was sending him straight into hypothermia. Wyatt managed to drag his battered body under the shelter of the overpass, leaning his back against the sloping concrete. His teeth chattered violently. He reached into his leather vest for his cell phone, only to pull out a shattered piece of plastic and glass. "Damn it," Wyatt hissed through chattering teeth, his breath catching as a spasm of uncontrollable shivering racked his massive frame. He knew the reality of his situation. Nobody was coming down this dead-end access road at 2 a.m. in an ice storm. If his core temperature kept dropping, he would be dead before sunrise. From the shadows, Liam watched the giant outlaw. Everything Liam had ever been taught about men who looked like Wyatt told him to run. The leather, the heavy boots, the tattoos creeping up Wyatt's thick neck, it all screamed danger. But as Liam watched the man's head slump forward, his chest heaving as the freezing air sapped the life from him, the boy didn't see a terrifying gang member. He just saw someone who was dying. Liam tightened his grip on his blue blanket. It was his only warmth. Without it, the biting wind felt like needles piercing his skin. He hesitated. Dalton had always told him that looking out for anyone but yourself was a fool's game. But Liam wasn't like Dalton. Slowly, the 8-year-old boy stepped out from the darkness. Wyatt's vision was blurring, the edges of the world turning dark, when he saw a tiny silhouette approaching him. He blinked, thinking the hypothermia was making him hallucinate. Mister, a small, trembling voice echoed over the wind. Wyatt forced his heavy eyes open. Standing before him was a child. The boy was shivering so violently he could barely stand. His lips tinted a dangerous shade of blue. "Kid, what the hell are you doing out here?" Wyatt rasped, his voice barely a whisper. Every syllable took a monumental effort. You're bleeding, Liam said softly. And you're shaking. I'll be all right. Go home, kid. Wyatt grunted, his eyelids drooping. He was fading fast. The fatal warmth of extreme hypothermia was beginning to trick his brain, making him feel a sudden, drowsy peace. Liam knew what that meant. He had seen stray dogs freeze to death in the alleyways. They always stopped shivering right before the end. Without another word, Liam unfolded his precious blue fleece blanket. He stepped right up to the terrifying biker and draped the small blanket over Wyatt's broad shoulders, tucking the edges inside the man's leather cut to trap the heat against his chest. Wyatt jolted slightly at the sudden touch. The blanket was incredibly thin, yet it carried the residual body heat of the small boy. Kid, no? You'll freeze, Wyatt mumbled, trying to push the fabric away with a heavy, uncoordinated hand. I'm okay, Liam lied, his teeth clacking together. He sat down on the frozen dirt next to the biker, pulling his knees to his chest. My mom said, if you share the warmth, it multiplies. Wyatt couldn't fight it anymore. His exhaustion pulled him into unconsciousness, the frayed blue blanket rising and falling with his shallow breaths. Beside him, in the freezing dark, little Leon closed his eyes, leaning his small shoulder against the giant outlaw's leather jacket, hoping they would both see the morning. The agonizing burn of sunlight pierced Wyatt's eyelids. He groaned, a deep, gravelly sound, as the pain in his torn leg flared to life. The wind had died down, and the morning sun was reflecting blindingly off the ice-coated pavement. Wyatt blinked, his mind sluggishly piecing together the events of the previous night. The crash, the blood, the freezing dark, and then he felt it, the soft, worn fleece tucked securely around his neck and chest. Wyatt snapped awake, his heart hammering against his ribs. He turned his head frantically. Lying in the dirt beside him, curled into a tight fetal ball, was the boy. Leon was unconscious, his skin pale and ashen, his lips a terrifying shade of pale blue. The kid had given up his only source of warmth to a complete stranger, enduring the freezing night completely unprotected. Hey, kid, Wyatt roared, ignoring the tearing pain in his leg as he scrambled over to the boy. He grabbed Liam by the shoulders and shook him. The boy's head lolled back, completely unresponsive. His skin was ice-cold to the touch. Panic, a completely foreign emotion to the hardened Hell's Angel, seized Wyatt's chest. No. Come on, kid. Wake up. Wyatt ripped off his heavy leather cut, wrapping it tightly around Liam's tiny frame. He then scooped the boy up in his massive arms. Despite his injured leg, adrenaline flooded Wyatt's system. He limped furiously toward the main highway, carrying the boy like a fragile piece of glass. Within 10 minutes, a battered Ford pickup truck barreled down the highway. Wyatt stepped right into the middle of the road, forcing the truck to slam on its brakes. The driver, a terrified local farmer, didn't argue when the terrifying, blood-soaked biker yanked the passenger door open and climbed in, roaring at him to drive to the nearest diner. They arrived at Rosie's Diner, a known neutral ground on the outskirts of the city. Wyatt kicked the door open, carrying Liam inside. The warmth of the diner hit them like a physical wall. Get me hot coffee and every blanket you have in the back, Wyatt bellowed to the shocked waitress. He laid Liam down in a back booth, aggressively rubbing the boy's arms and legs to stimulate blood flow. It took 20 agonizing minutes of rubbing, hot towels, and sheer willpower before Liam took a sudden, gasping breath. The boy's eyes fluttered open, wide and terrified, as he took in the unfamiliar surroundings. Easy, kid. Easy. You're safe, Wyatt said, his deep voice surprisingly gentle. He pressed a warm mug of hot chocolate into trembling hands. Liam looked at the giant man, then down at the heavy leather jacket wrapped around him. You're alive, Liam whispered. Yeah, kid. Because of you, Wyatt said, staring at the boy with a profound intensity. You gave me your blanket. You almost froze to death for me. What? Liam took a small sip of the hot chocolate. You needed it more. Wyatt swallowed hard. In his world, loyalty was earned in blood and violence. Trust was a commodity that didn't exist. Yet here was an 8-year-old boy who had just defined the very essence of brotherhood without asking for a damn thing in return. What's your name, kid? Liam. I'm Wyatt. But my brothers call me Brick. Wyatt noticed the way Liam devoured the plate of pancakes the waitress brought over, eating with the desperate, frantic energy of a starved animal. As Liam reached across the table for the syrup dispenser, the oversized flannel shirt shifted, sliding up his arm. Wyatt's eyes instantly locked onto the boy's forearm. There, stark against his pale skin, were brutal, dark, purple bruises shaped exactly like a grown man's fingers. They weren't fresh. They were a few days old, layered over older, fading yellow marks. Wyatt's jaw tightened, a dangerous, quiet fury igniting behind his eyes. He gently reached out and held Liam's wrist. The boy flinched instinctively, shrinking back into the booth. "Who gave you those, Liam?" Wyatt asked, his voice completely stripped of its previous warmth, replaced by a cold, deadly calm. Liam looked away, terrified. "Nobody. I fell. Don't lie to me, kid. We shared the ice. That makes us family," Wyatt said softly. "Who put their hands on you?" Tears welled in Liam's eyes. The exhaustion and fear finally broke through his brave facade. "Mr. Dalton," he whispered, his voice trembling. "He runs the foster house. He gets mad. He locks us in the dark. I ran away. I can't go back, Brick. Please don't make me go back." Wyatt slowly released the boy's arm. He sat back in the booth, his mind racing. He was an outlaw, a convicted felon. He had no legal right to this child, and associating with a runaway foster kid was a fast track back to a federal cell. But as he looked at Liam, all Wyatt saw was the blue blanket that had saved his life. A debt had been incurred, and a Hell's Angel never, ever leaves a debt unpaid. Wyatt pulled a burner phone from his pocket, borrowed from the diner's cook, and dialed a number he knew by heart. "Yeah," a gruff voice answered on the other end. "Dutch, it's Brick," Wyatt said, his eyes never leaving Liam. Garrison Dutch Reed was the president of the Oakland chapter, a man of immense power and ruthless intellect. "Brick, where the hell are you? We found your bike on the 99. Looked like a slaughterhouse. I'm at Rosie's. I'm banged up, but I'm breathing," Wyatt said. He paused, the weight of what he was about to do settling heavily on his shoulders. "Dutch, I need the club, all of them. I've got a situation." "What kind of situation?" Dutch asked, his tone shifting to business. "I've got a kid, an orphan. He saved my life last night," Wyatt said. "And the man who was supposed to be taking care of him has been using him as a punching bag." Silence hung on the line for a long moment. Finally, Dutch spoke, and the menacing authority in his voice made the diner window panes seem to vibrate. "Keep him there. We ride in 20. Meanwhile, across town, Gregory Dalton was frantically dialing the local police captain. Dalton wasn't just abusing kids, he was skimming massive amounts of state funding. And if a kid disappeared and started talking to the authorities, his entire operation would collapse, landing him in prison. Dalton needed Liam back, and he needed him silenced. "Captain," Dalton sneered into the phone, his eyes scanning the empty bed where Liam had slept. "I need an APB out immediately. One of my boys was kidnapped last night. I saw the guys who took him. It was the Hells Angels." The lie was set in motion. The trap was sprung. Dalton thought he was playing the system to crush a helpless kid. He didn't realize he had just declared war on the most dangerous brotherhood on Earth. The quiet hum of the diner's old refrigerator was entirely swallowed by a sound that resonated deep within the chest. It started as a low, distant rumble echoing off the icy foothills, growing steadily into an earth-shaking, thunderous roar. Coffee cups on Rosie's counter began to rattle against their saucers. Liam shrank back against the cracked vinyl of the booth, his small hands instinctively gripping the oversized leather vest wrapped around his shoulders. Outside the frosted windows, the frozen morning was suddenly dominated by chrome and black leather. 20 massive Harley-Davidson motorcycles pulled into the snow-packed parking lot, moving in perfect, militaristic synchronization. They cut their engines almost simultaneously, leaving a heavy, ringing silence in their wake. The diner door swung open. A rush of freezing air swept through the room, preceding a man who looked like he had been carved directly out of a mountainside. Garrison Dutch Reed, the president of the Oakland chapter, stepped inside. He wore a battle-scarred leather cut adorned with the president's patch, his cold, calculating eyes scanning the room before locking instantly onto the back booth. Behind him, 19 heavily tattooed, menacing outlaws poured into the small diner, blocking the exits and filling the space with an aura of undeniable, terrifying power. Rosie, the diner owner, wisely stepped back into the kitchen, letting the swinging doors close in absolute silence. Dutch walked slowly toward the back booth, his heavy boots thudding against the checkered linoleum floor. He looked down at Wyatt, noting the makeshift bandages soaking through the giant man's jeans, then shifted his imposing gaze to the tiny, terrified boy huddled beside him. "Brick," Dutch said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that commanded instant respect. "You look like you lost a fight with a freight train." "A storm caught me blind, Dutch," Wyatt replied, not breaking eye contact with his president. "Bike is a total loss, but that doesn't matter right now. This is Liam." Dutch knelt down, a surprising move for a man who demanded everyone else stand at attention. He leveled his eyes with the 8-year-old boy. Dutch's face was weathered and stern, but as he looked at Liam, a subtle shift occurred in his hardened expression. He reached out with a massive, ring-covered hand and gently tilted Liam's chin, inspecting the horrific, fading purple bruises on the boy's neck and arms. "Liam," Dutch said softly, the menacing edge vanishing from his tone entirely. "My brother here tells me you gave up your only blanket to keep him breathing. Is that the truth?" Liam swallowed hard, intimidated by the giant men surrounding him, but he nodded slowly. "He was shaking real bad, mister. I didn't want him to fall asleep in the snow. If you fall asleep out there, you don't wake up." A heavy, emotional silence fell over the 20 hardened criminals in the room. Men who had survived riots, prison yards, and vicious turf wars found themselves staring at a starved, beaten child who possessed more honor in his pinky finger than most men had in their entire souls. "You got a debt, Brick," Dutch finally said, standing up to his full height. He turned to face the rest of the club. "We all got a debt. This boy is under the protection of the death head now. Anyone touches a hair on his head, they answer to Oakland." A collective low murmur of agreement rumbled through the outlaws, but the moment of brotherhood was shattered by the shrill, frantic wail of police sirens tearing down the access road. Red and blue lights aggressively strobed against the diner's frosted windows. For police cruisers skidded into the parking lot, aggressively boxing in the parked motorcycles. The doors flew open, and a dozen armed officers stepped out, hands hovering nervously over their holstered weapons. Leading them was Captain Miller, a notoriously corrupt local cop who had been lining his pockets with Gregory Dalton's dirty foster care money for years. Miller kicked the diner door open, his hand gripping his service weapon. "Nobody moves. Hands where I can see them," he barked, his eyes darting nervously over the sea of leather and denim. "Wyatt Lawson, you are under arrest for the kidnapping of a minor." Wyatt tried to stand, ignoring the searing pain in his torn leg, but Dutch placed a heavy hand on his shoulder, keeping him seated. Dutch stepped forward, his presence completely overwhelming the frantic police captain. "Kidnapping?" Dutch asked, his voice dripping with dark amusement. "That's a heavy accusation, Captain Miller, especially considering this boy wandered out into a freezing ice storm completely on his own to escape a house of horrors. A house, I might add, that you've personally signed off on during routine welfare checks for the last 3 years." Miller's face flushed a dangerous shade of red, a vein pulsing wildly in his forehead. "Shut your mouth, Reed. I got a frantic call from a respected foster parent saying a gang of bikers dragged this kid out of his bed. The state gave Dalton custody. I am taking the boy back right now, and the rest of you scumbags are going to county lockup." Miller took a step toward the booth. Instantly, 19 Hells Angels moved in unison, forming a solid, impenetrable wall of muscle and leather between the police and the boy. Hands subtly slid toward heavy metal chains and concealed combat knives. The tension in the room skyrocketed, thick and suffocating, hovering mere seconds away from a violent, bloody bloodbath. "You step closer, Miller, and you're going to need a lot more body bags," Dutch warned, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "I have the law on my side," Miller yelled, pulling his weapon out just an inch from the holster. "You have a badge, Miller." "That's not the same thing," Dutch countered smoothly. He reached into his leather vest. The cops instantly drew their guns, shouting warnings, but Dutch simply pulled out a sleek, modern smartphone and tossed it onto the diner counter. "Before you do something incredibly stupid and get all your deputies killed, I suggest you look at the files my tech guy just pulled from Dalton's offshore accounts." Miller froze, his eyes darting to the glowing screen on the counter. Turns out, Dutch continued, his voice echoing loudly in the silent room. Dalton has been collecting premium state funding for severe needs orphans, claiming he's providing medical care and therapy. Instead, he's locking them in an unheated cellar and funneling the taxpayer money through a shell company in Panama. A shell company that, coincidentally, just bought you a very nice luxury boat last summer. Captain Miller's face drained of all color. His hand trembled slightly over his holster. Now, Dutch smiled, a cold, predatory grin that sent shivers down the spine of every cop in the room. I've already forwarded those banking records to the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Sacramento. The state feds don't like it when local cops steal their money. They are on their way to Dalton's farm right now. You can either walk out that door, get in your cruiser, and try to make it to the Mexican border before the FBI catches you, or you can draw that gun and die on the floor of this diner. Miller stared at the phone, then at the impenetrable wall of bikers. He knew he was utterly defeated. His corruption had finally caught up with him, trapped perfectly by a gang of outlaws who played the game better than he ever could. Without saying a word, Miller slowly backed away, pushing through the diner doors and sprinting toward his cruiser. The remaining local cops, confused and terrified by their captain's sudden retreat, quickly holstered their weapons and followed him into the freezing morning. Liam peeked out from behind Wyatt's massive arm, his wide eyes looking at the president of the Hells Angels. "Are they gone?" Liam whispered. "They're gone, kid," Dutch said, turning back around with a gentle expression. "But we still have one more piece of business to take care of." An hour later, the roaring convoy of Harleys pulled up to the rusted gates of Gregory Dalton's isolated farmhouse. Wyatt rode on the back of Dutch's custom chopper, his injured leg stabilized with a splint fashioned from a booth leg and duct tape. Liam sat safely wedged between the two massive bikers, completely shielded from the biting wind, wearing a newly purchased heavy winter coat over his bruised frame. The farmhouse looked like a scene from a nightmare, dilapidated, rotting wood, and windows boarded up from the inside. But as the bikers killed their engines, a beautiful sight greeted them. 4 black SUV federal vehicles were already parked on the frozen lawn. Federal agents were systematically escorting 5 shivering, terrified children out of the house, wrapping them in thick thermal blankets and loading them into heated transport vans. Gregory Dalton, the cruel tyrant who had tormented Liam and the others for years, was being marched down the front steps in heavy steel handcuffs. He looked disheveled, pathetic, and completely broken. As Dalton was pushed toward a federal vehicle, he locked eyes with the wall of bikers standing by the gate. Then he saw little Liam standing safely amidst the terrifying giants. Dalton's face contorted in rage, realizing exactly who had orchestrated his downfall. Dalton opened his mouth to shout something vicious, but Dutch simply took one slow, deliberate step forward. The sheer, overwhelming menace radiating from the Hells Angels president forced the coward to snap his mouth shut and quickly duck into the back of the FBI vehicle, terrified for his miserable life. Agent Hayes, a sharp, no-nonsense federal investigator in a tailored suit, walked over to the gate. He eyed the gang of outlaws with a mixture of suspicion and grudging respect. "We got your anonymous tip," Hayes said, his breath pluming in the cold air. "Found the kids locked in the basement. Dalton is going away for a very, very long time. Embezzlement, child endangerment, fraud. But I have a problem, Reed. The state roster says there should be one more boy here." "Liam." Hayes looked down at the 8-year-old boy standing securely between Dutch and Wyatt. "I need to take him into protective custody, gentlemen. He has to go back into the system." Wyatt stepped forward, his massive frame towering over the federal agent. "He's not going back into any system," Wyatt growled, his voice vibrating with absolute finality. "The system put him in a freezing cellar and let a monster beat him black and blue. The system failed him. He stays with me." Hayes frowned, placing a hand on his belt. "Wyatt Lawson, you are a convicted felon with a rap sheet longer than my arm. You legally cannot be a foster parent. Hand the boy over, or I will arrest you right now." Before Wyatt could explode, an expensive black Mercedes sedan glided smoothly down the dirt driveway, parking directly behind the federal SUVs. The door opened, and a sharp-dressed man with a briefcase stepped out. This was Attorney Harrison, the highly paid, ruthless legal counsel retained exclusively by the Oakland Hells Angels chapter. Agent Hayes, Harrison said smoothly, adjusting his expensive tie. I wouldn't be so quick to threaten my clients. Under Section 304 of the State Family Code, my client, Mr. Wyatt Lawson, has officially filed a petition for emergency kinship guardianship. Hayes scoffed loudly. Kinship? He's a biker, not a blood relative. Ah, but that's where you are misinformed, Harrison smiled, opening his briefcase and producing a stack of freshly stamped legal documents. According to these newly discovered, highly authenticated records, Mr. Lawson is actually the boy's distant maternal uncle. Tragic how families lose touch, isn't it? Given the absolute, catastrophic failure of the state to protect this child, a friendly family court judge who owes my firm a rather large favor signed an emergency protective custody order at 8 a.m. this morning. Harrison handed the thick folder to the federal agent. Hayes read through the documents, his eyes narrowing. The paperwork was flawless. The background checks were miraculously clean. It was a massive, highly illegal fabrication of epic proportions, orchestrated by the club's bottomless resources and ruthless legal team. This is completely fabricated, Hayes hissed, looking furiously between the lawyer and the bikers. Prove it, Dutch challenged softly, his eyes cold and dead. Take it to trial. Spend 5 years fighting our lawyers in court. Meanwhile, the press gets a front row seat to how the federal government allowed a monster to torture orphans for 3 years while pocketing taxpayer cash. Or you accept the paperwork, close the file on Liam, and take your big career victory with Dalton. Hayes stared at the imposing bikers, then looked down at the forged documents. He looked at Liam, who was clinging tightly to Wyatt's heavy leather jacket, looking safer and more protected than any foster kid in the system ever had. Hayes knew when he was beaten. Have a good life, kid, Hayes muttered, shoving the file back into Harrison's chest before turning on his heel and marching back to his vehicle. Wyatt dropped to one knee, wincing in pain, but ignoring it as he looked directly into Liam's bright eyes. The cold wind whipped around them, but neither of them felt the chill anymore. You hear that, kid? Wyatt said, his voice thick with uncharacteristic emotion. He pulled the frayed blue fleece blanket from his saddlebag and carefully wrapped it around Liam's shoulders. You're never sleeping in the cold again. You're home. Liam smiled, a genuine, glowing smile that reached his eyes for the first time in his life. He wrapped his small arms around the giant outlaw's thick neck, burying his face in the leather. 20 Hells Angels started their engines simultaneously, the deafening roar drowning out the howling winter wind. They weren't just a gang riding down the highway anymore. They were an unbreakable fortress, a family built from frozen ice and sheer willpower. Liam rode on the back of Wyatt's borrowed chopper, the blue blanket fluttering in the wind like a flag of victory. He was a runaway no more. He was a son of the Brotherhood. If this incredible true story of brotherhood and survival touched your heart, please hit that like button and share this video with your friends. It helps us bring more untold, amazing stories to light. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss an inspiring true life tale. We always upload new videos every single week. Drop a comment below to let us know your thoughts on this unbreakable family bond.